exciting panel that will talk about culture diplomacy, again through the eyes of cultural responsibility and technology. I think many of you know who are the participants here, and I think many of them have really inspired us throughout the years with their ideas and charm as well. So allow me to welcome His Excellency Zeki Nusseibeh, Minister of State in the UAE, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, former Prime Minister of Spain, Jorge Fernando, President of Bolivia and member of the Club de Madrid, and Bernardino Leon, Director General of Emirates Diplomatic Academy. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everybody. About a quarter of a century ago, an American scholar, Fukuyama, famously predicted the end of history, the end of the Cold War, the crumbling of walls between countries, the burgeoning new economies. There was a new optimism in the air. Soon after, the end of history gave way to the clash of civilizations, and a new mood of pessimism set in. And I think, as most would agree, and with my speakers today, neither prophecy was quite right, or rather, they were a little right in some ways, but not to the extent that their authors predicted. So if human history is this swing between pessimism and optimism, we have to admit that a quarter of a century after the falling of the walls in Europe, we are in a new sense of pessimism, where free trade was seen as an ideal that all nations wanted to accept as a way to bring populations out of poverty. There is a new voice for isolationism and protectionism. And I think it would be true to argue that intolerance today and violence associated with intolerance seems to be on the spread. And there was a marvelous story I read last week in the New Yorker that really echoed that image. A reviewer in the New Yorker wrote about La Forza del Destino, the masterpiece by Giuseppe Verdi, based on a Spanish drama. And he explained it that in the Royal Covent Garden, there was a Russian soprano, a German tenor, a French baritone, and an Italian basso, that the audience included people who spoke all European languages, that the performance received a rapturous acclamation, and yet outside, there were demonstrations seeking to shut Europe out of the United Kingdom. So Europe united at the level, he wrote, of the cultural elite seems to be widely dispersed on the level of mass politics. So we meet in this summit to discuss, and we are very fortunate to have these notable diplomats, statesmen with us who had worked in culture, to discuss cultural identity, the role and responsibilities of culture and cultural diplomacy in a connected yet polarized world. We have to admit that although cultural identity is an important force and factor that can be used to bring cohesion to communities, allowing governments to use it for sustainable development, to build bridges, yet in this rapidly developing technology that is also the theme of this summit, the same focus on a specific cultural identity can be used to shackle groups in isolated bubbles that then identify other racial, ethnic, or religious groups as enemies that must be expelled or worse still eradicated. And this isolation is magnified in the echo chambers that the new technology brings them, which can many times over magnify this sense of delusional paranoia, as we have unfortunately seen recently from Raqqa to Mosul to Christchurch. So we wish to discuss with our statesmen and diplomats today the ideas pertaining to cultural responsibility as it is manifest in cultural diplomacy. We know that responsible action is needed in every cultural act, but also statesmen and politicians need to use cultural diplomacy in order to address these issues. So how do politicians and diplomats navigate, respond to urgent times such as we witness today? How do they convey their ideas to their constituents and to their societies? How can the field of cultural diplomacy help when there has been this populism that has spread across globally? And in this world of technology, how can statesmen use the force of cultural identity while addressing at the same time cultural diversity? Our very distinguished guests have been introduced. Each one of them has been very active as a statesman, as a politician, as leaders, and in cultural diplomacy. So I would ask each of our interlocutors perhaps to give us a general statement, and then we move to our other interlocutors, and then we can have asked any further questions that may come us. So, Your Excellency, Signor Zapatero, can we ask you to discuss some of these themes we brought up?
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank His Excellency Zaki Nusayeb for this invitation. The Culture Summit in Abu Dhabi has become an international reference. I would like to congratulate to United Arab Emirates and more specifically Abu Dhabi for choosing culture as a way to achieve peace and coexistence. I belong to a country that has inherited a deep cultural tradition, a country with Celtic, Iberian, Christian, and Islamic influence. Al-Andalus was an example of coexistence and culture. Culture helps us to understand diversity, pluralism, the different identities and religions. Culture overcomes hate and fanaticism because it does not use force, but creativity and intelligence. Culture unites. It unites us to live together. There is no culture, no civilization or religion superior to another. Only respect and recognition of the other are superior. That is why I put forward the Alliance of Civilizations in the United Nations to create a shared culture for East and West to work together, for Islam and the other religions to strive together for peace. Initiatives like the Alliance of Civilization are the instruments of a culture for peace. We must support them. We must put forward that international and regional organizations like the G20, the European Union, and the Gulf Council incorporate culture as one of their main priorities. All official organizations must relaunch public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy. No more than ever before in history, we can make culture a universal public good. No more than ever before in history, information technologies give us knowledge without frontiers. Now more than ever before in history, we can transform the technological revolution into a road to peace. Governments, international organizations, and big technological corporations have the historical responsibility to ensure that big data, artificial intelligence, and the internet are tools for the promotion of the great values of coexistence. An international declaration of commitment that would open the way for an international agreement on universal digital rights. Would be a great conquest for humankind. In the same way, we must remain and defend the reality that there is no culture without artists. Supporting intellectual property rights must also be a fundamental condition. I would consider a United Nations Observatory on Technology a very useful initiative. Let me finish with a thought that is a result of my political experience. The best actions that I have achieved were inspired by cultural expressions. The ideas of peace, freedom, human rights, coexistence, justice, solidarity are present in books, in musical harmonies, in sculptures, in the best paintings, in the movies that we will never forget. And culture always represents an endless dialogue with other and with nature. A dialogue built on respect and recognition. A dialogue that brings us closer to peace. A dialogue that becomes the common language of civilization. There are reasons to be hopeful. I would like to commend the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. That is his Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed El-Tayeb, signed in Abu Dhabi on 4th February of this year. It is a great declaration. It is a great declaration. I would especially like to emphasize the defense of women's rights, the rejection of violence and extremism, and the call for reconciliation. We must work for these aims, for universal peace. The peace is the tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Zapatero. One personal question. In all your talks, you always mention some literary, philosophical figure, Aristotle, Borges, Cervantes. Reading these authors, did it affect your politics? Did it make you a better human being?
Yes, I remember in this moment three authors. The first time, the Cervantes, El Quijote. It's a brilliant manual of vision of the life of the policy. Second times, the brilliant writer from Argentina, Jorge Luis Borges, of course. And third place, I remember in this moment a philosopher, a Spanish philosopher, Spanish, of course, Maria Zambrano. She was a philosopher about the democracy, about the person, about the people in democracy. Well, all is in the books. The most important task in the life of a politician is now the best books, the best books. But I I belong to a club, a new club. The new club is Anonymous Optimistics. I belong.
Well, let's hope that we are all optimists as well. You have mentioned, President Zapatero, the fraternity document of Brotherhood of Mankind that was signed here at the end, the visit of His Holiness the Pope, signed with His Grace, the Imam of Al-Azhar. And this brings us naturally to our next distinguished guest, the ex-president, vice president of Bolivia, and the chairman of the party, of the Christian Democratic Party, that is based in part on the philosophy of Jacques Martin, the philosopher who was instrumental in developing the Declaration of Human Rights at the end of the Second World War. Again, a period of pessimism that led us to a period of optimism. So perhaps, President Quiroga, can you tell us how you view the swing in moods, optimism and pessimism, and in your own experience, how did you use culture and cultural diplomacy in order to address these issues of the divisiveness of that culture can sometimes bring to our own society?
Thank you, Minister. It's a pleasure to be here. First, I want to thank the organizers for having us at this Culture Summit. Many here probably come from long distances. No one has come from as high as I have come. I live in La Paz, Bolivia. 4,000 meters over sea level. It's the only place in the world where Lionel Messi has never scored a goal, never will. It's the home court advantage. And it's a pleasure to be here with you as well, Minister, because you're part of the history of this great confederation. I was telling you, talking to you is probably like talking to the advisor of Simón Bolívar, the great South American that liberated 5 countries. He wanted us to have one confederation. He did not succeed in that endeavor. We're 5 separate countries. You did succeed in creating this beautiful, wonderful land that is a shining example of integration and a vision for long-term development. Regarding what you're mentioning, let me make 4 quick observations. 1, the optimism. 2nd, the part on technology, identity, and then the fraternity document that you mentioned. First, optimism. I guess it depends on where you are in terms of how optimistic a nation or a region can be. I come from Latin America. At the turn of the century, we were used to G7 countries meeting somewhere, dictating policy, determining what trade agreements would happen or not. And we were usually the culprits of financial or economic crises in Latin America. The Mexico tequila crisis, the Argentina tango crisis, and what have you. But this century has been generally positive for Latin America. We can tell G7 countries that from a regional standpoint, we grow twice as fast as G7 countries do, with half of the debt, with a quarter of the fiscal deficit, having reduced poverty from 50 to 30%. Now, if you turn on to CNN, you will see the flashpoints and the difficult areas that we have in Latin America. But generally, it's been a good time for our part of the world. Second observation on technology, which has dramatically changed how we live. Mr. Minister, I was a young systems engineer in IBM in the 80s. And I remember where computer power was deposited in a big, large room. We used to sell those systems. And all you had was dumb terminals, and you had to go to work from 8 to 6. And I tell my daughters, in the 80s, Amazon was a river in Brazil. Google was a soccer announcer screaming for a goal. Apple was the record label for the Beatles, and nothing else than that. And now the world has changed dramatically. I tell my daughters, in college I used to have a physical P.O. box where your girlfriends from Bolivia would wave you goodbye through letters with stamps. Now we live in a totally different world. To carry everything I can do with my phone 25 years ago, I would have had to bring here 4 or 5 suitcases with cameras and TVs and fax machines and whatever else I could have found. We clearly have opportunities we have never had before. That brings opportunities, but also challenges. We have a lot of people that in a sharing economy that can provide a service that you can connect digitally to people that have spare income and can hire that service, whether it's cabs, hotels, or what have you. That's causing massive job displacement, and is also making us live in gated communities where we like to digitally interconnect with people that think like us, and we wind up reinforcing what we already thought. The third observation on this, the identity. I come from Latin America. We always get asked when the U.S. has to elect a president, do you prefer Republicans or a Democrat? I used to answer, I want a blender. We generally like Republican trade policies, more open to our products, and Democratic migration policies, more open to our people. And lo and behold, in the last election, we had a platform that did not want our products or our people, and wanted to be very protectionist on trade, and very, quite frankly, racist when it came to identity. Why? Because technology is displacing jobs, and you cannot blame Amazon or the computers or Google, and it's easier to blame somebody that does not look like you when you have job displacement. And trust me, we have tried that in Latin America. We have tried blaming the Americans, the Spanish, and everybody else. It does not work. But yet here we are, where the developed world, the massive job displacement that is taking place, is being leveraged to blame someone who does not look like you, a Muslim in Europe, a Mexican or a Latin American in the U.S. And in the U.S., I remember in a forum like this in 2015, I wanted to express my concerns about the platform that was being espoused in the U.S. campaign. I was asked to not mention any names, so I scratched my head. I said, I'm not going to mention any names, but I'm worried about the policy espoused by Trump. I didn't mention any names. T, take out 11 million Latins, because we're displacing jobs. R, remittances that would be impounded. U, USA. M, the muro, the wall that was going to be built. And for the first time in humanity, a wall that was going to be paid by the aggrieved party. The Soviets were nice enough to pay for their own wall. And P, protectionism when it came to trade. So it is not a matter of one person, by the way. It is something that is structural. It will continue to be on the table. It will continue to mobilize politics. And unfortunately, we will continue to see people that want to get to power by blaming somebody that does not look like you in terms of identity. And that, in closing, that's the importance of the document that you mentioned, the declaration that was done here by the most important Latin America. It's not Messi, it's our Pope who was here, signing the declaration of tolerance, of being able to get along with people despite whatever differences you may have in terms of ethnicity, religion, or the place where you come from. And I think the value of cultural diplomacy in that statement is great for what we need to do. I'll close, Minister, with the following little story. I live up in the mountains. I go climb the mountains, 6,500 meters. And it doesn't matter if you're Aymara, Quechua, Mestizo, or what have you. You need the equipment, you need the desire to go climb, and you need one element. You need a rope to tie you to the people that you're climbing with. To me, culture, artistry, and everything that is represented in this panel, it is the rope that binds you together, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from, no matter how you pray, to be able to reach the summit of progress and development, and that is the value of cultural diplomacy.
A personal question.
Thank you.
President Quiroga, a personal question. As Vice President of the Club of Madrid, not a football club, but a club that has ex-prime ministers and presidents that discusses world issues and problems, what I specifically want to ask, when you sit together, is culture an important subject of discussions in your meetings? Do you look at culture? Do you discuss it? Do you use it as an instrument of resolving some of these issues we are facing today?
Yeah, we certainly do, Minister. I'm glad you mentioned it. We are members with Prime Minister Zapatero of the Club de Madrid, not to be confused with the soccer team. If it was a soccer team, we probably would have called it Club de Barcelona, at least this year. But over 100 former heads of state that we get involved in different projects and discuss issues that are a concern of the world. And we clearly have something in common. We have been heads of state of government in different parts of the world. But certainly culture integration is key to all of us. I can tell you that we meet with a lot of people also from my part of the world, Latin America, and we need to learn a lot from you, because despite oil can be a curse as well. I know plenty of countries that have plenty of oil that haven't done so well as you have. As a matter of fact, it can be a matter of division, but how do you integrate and form a confederation and do integration? or how do you integrate like Europe used to be integrated before the Brexit came along. And I think we need to learn from that. And if there's one shining example, is that in Europe, people would speak different languages, pray to different gods, have different cultures, but yet would integrate when it came to trade. In Latin America, we are very good at preaching integration, but not very good at practicing. The only place where integration truly works for Latin America is the front line of the Barcelona soccer team, where Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, they play wonderful together, but if you try to do trade in South America, not so much. And the last point on culture, I think it's what binds us together more than anything else. I think several of us have probably been to the Davos World Economic Forum, and I remember the great Mario Vargas Llosa one time said, "We need to be more like Switzerland." And people said, "In what sense?" In the sense that nobody really knows a Swiss politician. And in Latin America, we create this larger-than-life figures, and we know politicians very well, and governments can send you down the drain or send you to the top of the mountain, but yet we have not been able to work on long-term development where politics is not a life or death matter. It doesn't go all the way, one way or the other. And I think where culture comes, is better to have culture be what you export. If you ask, Peru has problems, but Peruvian restaurants are famous worldwide. Argentina soccer players are famous worldwide. Mexican directors win the Oscar every year for the last, I don't know how many years. And I think those are the things that allow you, from a region, to have something that joins you together and to have something to be proud about and to move forward together.
And we are very proud about what we have been able to achieve in the last 50 years. As you have said, it was a miracle of development. And this brings us to our third, finally, but not least important guest, the distinguished diplomat and statesman, and for me, an active cultural actor. Very few people know that, in addition, of course, today in the Emirates, in running our diplomatic academy, which is instrumental, incidentally, in developing our own diplomats as we set out to establish an office for cultural and public diplomacy in our own Ministry of Foreign and International Affairs. Bernardino has discovered himself a very well-known today Algerian artist, buyer, who was almost unknown, a young Algerian who went to Paris, worked in the atelier of Picasso, and then suddenly disappeared from public view. And when Bernardino was in Algeria, he was able to find that artist, bring an exhibition of her works, and now she is, incidentally, very sought after by many of our collectors in the UAE. So Bernardino, perhaps we come to you as the man who has attempted to do so many diplomatic missions using culture as instrumental, and the man who is training our young diplomats to be also cultural ambassadors in the future. How do you view the issues that we are facing today on cultural identity, cultural divisiveness, and these echo chambers in which we seem to be isolating from one another?
Thank you. Well, first of all, Excellency, dear Saki, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you and congratulations to Minister Akabi, to Mohammed Al-Mubarak. This is becoming a fantastic opportunity not only to discuss culture, but to discuss the great challenges we're facing in the world today. I would like to start with a couple of points. First of all, on culture, the second on tolerance and human rights, and the third one on diplomacy and how I can see the three of them interacting. There is something, when I think of culture, that connects Greece 25 centuries ago and Louvre, Abu Dhabi today. 25 centuries ago in Greece, allegiance was to the city, to the polis. And this was a sacred idea. To the extent that Socrates, the most important Greek philosopher, died just because he wanted to make the point that he had to respect the laws of the polis, even if these laws were unfair. And just a few hundred years later, Diogenes, founder of cynicism as a philosophic school, not cynicism as we know it today, said, no, my allegiance is not to the polis. This is artificial. My allegiance is to the world. I am a citizen of the world. And he was the first one to say, I am a cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world. This tells us that many of the reasons the world has been using throughout centuries for war, for conflict, have been just cultural constructions. The second idea is about tolerance. What means tolerance? What means respecting everyone, whatever his religion, whatever his idea? We go back, you mentioned before, the Human Rights Declaration. It means that every person, every individual, whatever his origin, whatever his position in society, whatever his nationality, has a common and equal dignity, which is the main principle of human rights. And once a society accepts this, and I'm very, by being a person who lives in Abu Dhabi, we have mentioned before the Pope and the Al-Azhar Imam declaration. We are in the year of tolerance. I'm very happy to see that this idea becomes in the front line, because it is really the essence. Once every person is recognized as equal dignity, everyone's culture will be respected, and we have the possibility to have a productive dialogue, to have peace, which is at the end what matters. Third idea, very briefly, about diplomacy. You know, we have here today a lot of ambassadors from all continents, regions, countries. And each diplomat here and each diplomat around the world represents a country with a national interest. But there is something that whoever is in the diplomatic environment knows very well, is that all speak a similar language. This is not a language that could be English or Spanish or French or any other international language. This is the language of culture. And this is why you have so many diplomats that are writing or painting or interested in culture. Common culture is the way to have diplomacy working in moments of tensions, in moments of political differences. And today we live in a world, as President Quiroga said very rightly, in which social media are dominating. But social media are like diplomacy. These are two mediums. What matters is the ideas that these mediums are conveying. And social media allow, unfortunately, a lot of hate speech, a lot of hatred circulating, because there is anonymity. And these are not anonymous optimists, but anonymous haters. So diplomacy is never a vehicle, it's never a medium for hate, because diplomacy is based on personal interconnection, and this is another basic cultural principle. And I think it's very important to ask societies today to remember this key principle of cultural diplomacy.
Thank you very much. I think all three of our interlocutors make us a little more optimistic today, so we hope that the swing into optimism will carry on throughout this cultural summit. The MC will tell us if there is time for people to ask questions, or do we come to a conclusion?
Thank you, Excellencies. We do have a couple of minutes, though. Any questions? Please, yes, raise your hands. All right. Yes, over there. Thank you.
President Quiroga, you mentioned that it's good to export cultures as a region. How would you see that impacting, for example, last week we saw Fox News mentioning Mexican countries. How would you see from your region
Thank you.
Well, clearly Fox News needs a little bit of help with culture. I would say that as a first point. I think it has to do with the tensions that we were discussing here, that it is easier to blame somebody because they are stealing your jobs, and therefore they do not look like you. You cannot blame robots, you cannot blame automation, but it's easier to blame somebody that does not look like you. And in the US, unfortunately, many people have decided that the reason that you're displacing manufacturing jobs, that you're losing opportunities is because too many of us brown people, Mexicans and Latin Americans are coming. We'll see how it all comes to play. I would tell you that it is sad that that in the U.S. that has been a land of opportunity and assimilation, you now have the current. I hope they get over it. I think Winston Churchill used to say, and I hope he's right once again, that the United States of America always does the right thing once they've exhausted all other alternatives. We're hoping that that's what happens again.
Thank you very much. We have another question.
Yes.
Please, and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Madeleine Alingue. I'm from the Republic of Chad, Minister of Culture and Tourism of Chad. I would like to, of course, thank very much for the invitation to participate in this great summit. For us, it's the first information that it's the third edition of this first summit, and really we would like to congratulate you. And the other is, of course, thank you very much for all those interesting inputs that you have given us. I just want to remind that Chad is in a Central African country, and I do think that it's very important that we can bring into those kind of regions into the conversation. Chad has been, in the last 20 years, into conflict, fighting against terrorism. And we have, of course, been struggling. When we fight against terrorism, we fight to impose also a certain type of culture of peace, culture of dialogue. And sometimes we need to use
That's the last question.
war to get to peace. Of course, this is not a new, not a new technique. But I do think that coming from a region where cultural diversity is extreme. It's extreme. We have more than 200 different ethnic groups in our regions, and we have to fight something that can unite us culturally to get peace. I do think that it's a very, very important thing to do. And when we talk about cultural diplomacy, cultural diplomacy is to respect diversity, and many times by the meanings of force, by the meaning of domination. So I would really like to introduce our regions in your conversation to see so that how can we have solutions to the differences that we can bring into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Sorry, that's the last question. Please, if the panelists may respond or comment on Her Excellency.
No, I think it's very important. You're very right to say that we need to look. We have become a globalized world today. We have said earlier that we look at different groups. Each group feels isolated in its own bubble. And undoubtedly, what you bring to this discussion is very important. We need to look at countries like Chad and others in Central Africa. You know, the UAE is very involved in the politics as well, development politics of Africa, has been an active supporter of stability, security, durable development in Africa, exactly for some of these reasons, which is to face the insecurities that are created by the violence of these certain groups that seek to find division between societies. So it is an important contribution. Thank you very much. And I assure you that here in the Emirates, Africa is very much part of our strategic also thinking.
Thank you. Thank you for that. If I may just add a comment, perhaps. We're not going to take questions, just a few seconds before we end the session. But there seems to be an expectation from perhaps the public to see the policymakers and thought leaders. We talked about people who are in academia, who are leaders in government institutions or cultural institutions. But there are expectations, I think, that we all share that responsibility to look into culture, look how we can use it and be effective using it as an instrument for change or progress. And if I can ask, I know you are all on social media platforms, so please, some of these ideas and thoughts, post them for us, inspire us, all right? And thank you again for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts and ideas with the summit here.
Thank you very much.